Cosmic Disclosure, Deeper Disclosures from William Tompkins. David Wilcock. Alright, welcome to Cosmic Disclosure. I'm your host, David Wilcock, and I'm here with the Insider's Insider, Corey Good, who has brought us a truly incredible repository of cosmic information that has now been verified by the insider William Tompkins, who at 94 years old, is a World War II veteran who has provided stunning corroboration of what Corey has had to tell us. So, Corey, welcome to the show. Corey Good, thank you. David, so what we're going to do now is we're going to begin with a little excerpt of some of the things that Tompkins has been sharing with us about the amount of unlearning that is going to be necessary as we move into full disclosure. Let's take a look. William Tompkins. People all over this planet, for at least 6,000 years, have been influenced by extraterrestrials, the Dracos and the reptilians. They have taken the information that is in, essentially, every school on the planet and they've modified the information. All history documentation in this country and in every country on the planet have been given lies about astronomy, lies about mathematics, lies about technical capabilities, lies about the universe, you name it. Okay? Everything have been lies. Every PhD on this planet, whether they're scientific, whether they're medical, makes no difference. Every book that they read the 6 years they were in the university are lies. They are not telling the truth. They were not taught the truth. At that time, when World War II began, we had 34 admirals in the Navy. All of them had been through Annapolis. They learned how to learn everything about the Navy, everything about history, everything about mathematics, everything about astronomy, you name it. They learned all lies. So who did the Secretary of the Navy Force still select for this job? Turns out Admiral Rico Botta was not an American. He was born in Australia. The Secretary of the Navy selected an Australian man who had not been infected with the lies that the reptilians had taught us. He was freer of that. So the Secretary of the Navy was aware of this because he had been contacted by Nordic extraterrestrials, people here trying to help United States. Okay? Very important point. So when I was selected, I hadn't been to the universities. I hadn't gotten the bad information. I hadn't been given the wrong information. And this is the reason I was selected, because I was knowledgeable of the Navy, I was knowledgeable of what the threats were, but I hadn't gone to the university and picked up all the lies. Very important. David, Corey, how do you feel about that? That's a pretty bold, cowboy statement that Tompkins just made here. Corey, it was common knowledge in the programs. They would talk quite often about how the physics models that we are using down here on the planet are incorrect. And they have not been corrected on purpose. They use different hyperdimensional mathematics models than what are used down here. You know, the physics models. You know, we're still on this quantum and, you know, classical physics model. David, sure. Corey, while they are deeply into this electroplasmic universe model of physics, which is the true model. And another thing he mentioned was that they wanted people that had not been, I guess, corrupted by this incorrect education. That is very common in the programs. That's why they were taking children in, because we were not front-loaded yet on different religious ideas, social programming. A lot of that hadn't occurred yet. So they had basically a blank slate to work with. David, it is interesting, isn't it, the government studies that have shown that if they did disclosure, the two groups that would be the most hard hit by it would be religious people and scientists. Corey, yep, the academics. David, so do you think that this science itself becomes a religion? Corey, absolutely. We spend life using every experience or information that we've heard from people we respect. We use that as little pieces of sand to grind into a lens that we use to hold up to all information coming in to interpret it. Those are all belief systems. They're all religions, even science. David, yeah. He also mentioned astronomy. And where do you think astronomy has fallen short? Corey, I think that keeping astronomers ignorant of the electroplasmic universe model sums it up. David, right. Corey, They're making calculations on what they're observing and using incorrect math to make the calculations. David, if we are acknowledging that reptilians exist, how would that happen? Corey, well, you often hear that the victors write the history. Beings that are in control dictate what the minions get to hear. David, right. Corey, and it's all done for control purposes. If you keep people ignorant, it's a throwback to people not being allowed to read back in thousands of years ago, or currently in some places now even. You're keeping people ignorant so they don't begin to think, or they don't have the ability to do further research on their own. They have to go by what they are told. David, so when you say the minions, you're saying that we have various pressure points in our informational system, our educational system, that can be manipulated. Humans are being manipulated, maybe wittingly, maybe unwittingly, by an extraterrestrial agenda in terms of what information makes it into the universities. Corey, yes. They've been able to get us to program ourselves through social norms, what's socially acceptable. That's programming. That's a control system. And the same goes for educational systems. David, so how does this play out in terms of other civilizations that go through the same thing? What would we expect to see as this knowledge embargo breaks down? Corey, if you remember Micah, he's an ambassador from a nearby planet, that they've already gone through all of this change that we're starting to go through. And what he stated is that after we get the truth, or a full data dump of a full disclosure, we're going to go through, after we go through the 5 stages of grief, denial and all that, we're going to go through a consciousness renaissance. All these brilliant people that are scribbling down these math equations that they think are so brilliant, and they are given this hyperdimensional model, they've still got brilliant brains. And they're going to take this correct science and mathematics and they're going to run with it. David, how does our relationship to the universe change once the science is authentically given, instead of this reduced model? What do we look like now as conscious, sentient beings in this universe? Corey, if you take away a lot of the mystery of the universe, you're empowering people both intellectually and spiritually. They've got a lot more room to grow. David, what do you think it does to consciousness once this science suppression is removed? How do we see consciousness differently? Corey, consciousness, I believe, is going to evolve to the point to where we are able to, when we have these correct models, we have full disclosure, we have a better understanding of the nature of the universe, we're going to be able to not only understand our place in the universe, but our place on the planet and in our various societies. David, do you think that it will be more commonly accepted that consciousness is a field and not just something localized in the brain? Corey, that's one of the sciences that has been suppressed. So, yes, that will be revealed. David, what personal experience did you have with that science being suppressed in your programs? Corey, well, it was just common knowledge that the powers of the human consciousness were being suppressed on the earth, because our co-creative consciousness interacts with matter, because we can interact with matter. The same people that are controlling what we learn scientifically, they're able to control us by causing us to. It's like the root of their magic. They will create a catalyst and cause us to manifest something into occurring. David, what do you think happens when we get to this idea that there is only one consciousness in the universe? How does that affect us once that becomes public? Corey, well, we figure out that we are all one. We're not as different and separated as we think we are. David, cool. Alright. So in our next segment, we're going to go more into detail about the packages that Tompkins referred to only briefly in other episodes. I really didn't understand all the semantic depth of the word package until I got this knowledge. And I think you're going to be really fascinated too. Let's take a look. William Tompkins, they found out about extraterrestrials advising the SS in Germany and Hitler on how to build massive spacecraft carriers, how to build massive space cruisers to operate with a reptilian Draco space navy. Now, what this turned out to be, after I got heavily into this is the first time anybody in the United States knew that extraterrestrials were actually here on the planet and actually were working with Germany, had agreed, legal agreements, with Hitler. We then had these Navy spies, which we had operating there 24 hours a day from 1942 to the end of the war. I worked in that office. The Admiral's aide would wake me up after 12 o'clock at night. He would tap me on the shoulder in the barracks. All he would say is, "He's here." I would get up, dress real fast. The aide would take me over to the tall building, the command center. We'd go upstairs to a small office at the top of that building, not the regular big operation command rooms, small office. The Admiral would be sitting at the head of the table. The operative would be on the back side. I'm sitting next to the Admiral and one of the three captains is sitting next to me. The typist is sitting on the other side at the end of the table. But actually what the operatives brought were perspective sketches of different research that's going on inside of laboratories. They took photographs of the Germans next to the UFOs. Some of them were only 40 feet in diameter. Some were 250 foot in diameter. So to try to put a perspective on these documents then, we put together what was called packages. These types of packages, which are contracts to all of the Army, all of the Navy Aerospace Organization's laboratories, and all of the aircraft companies, biomedical research companies, all over the United States. Everybody got at least one package. Many people got as many as 10 or 12 packages to study. That was going on the whole length of the war. It's a contract that they are required to implement the study. They're not being asked, "Are you interested?" No. So it's a different contract. Okay? It's a requirement. And, of course, it's way above top secret, but we don't have the documents stamped that way. So the package then contains all this different information about, say, communications. All of it totally unreal to any possible engineering group. So, like say, you're president of engineering at Northrop. The package that you guys got was in German. Okay? Some of it was in hieroglyphics. Nothing that you had in a package would be understandable. You don't know the mathematics. You don't know the writing. You don't understand the photographs. You don't understand the rough sketches that the Navy operative makes. So you're handed a box full of very poor information. You are required to take that and run with it, but you have no background. You don't have any book on any subject that you can flip through the pages to try to figure out what this even is. You don't even know as communications. It might be part of a propulsion system. So this is why it was so difficult for all these people that got a package to take this and try to figure out what it is. Yes, it was a big learning curve for the Germans and the SS, but they had the vehicles. We just had paper and a couple of parts. I mean, it was very difficult for the United States with the top people in the country to take this and then come up with, "How do I copy this? How do I make one of those? What is it?" David, so Corey, the first thing that jumped out at me in what we just saw was when he said that he was woken up at midnight, and that was when he was taken up to have this meeting in which they're actually putting these so-called packages together. Why do you think it was necessary for him to be woken up in the middle of the night to do this work I mean, wouldn't there be a secure room that he could go to during the day? Why do you think that was necessary? Corey, most likely it had to do for the security of the operative. They want to bring him in when there's a skeleton crew at night taking care of regular duties. It's going to make it easier for them to sneak the person in. David, so people don't see it. There's less espionage potential? Corey, right. David, okay. And he mentioned that some of what these people were able to get out of Nazi Germany, he didn't mention the number, but it was 23 embedded spies, he's said that before, all throughout World War II, included photographs of people, soldiers, I guess, standing in front of UFO-type craft that could be anywhere between 50 to 140, I think he said, feet in diameter. I'm curious as to whether any of those documents survived and whether you got to see any of them while you were in the programs. Corey, there were stuff like that all through the glass pads. But sort of like how he was describing, a lot of the information, it wasn't contiguous. It was kind of just haphazardly there. You go through a lot of information that I didn't understand. There would be photos. There were many photos of Germans and craft. David, he also mentioned hieroglyphics. And that might be something that our viewers were wondering why that would have occurred. What would the hieroglyphics be? Corey, the hieroglyphics could be a security code, but in this case, it sounds like no one understood what they were. So they were most likely non-terrestrial script of some sort, iconography. David, so this could be something that a spy maybe had a spy camera and took a picture of something that was on an extraterrestrial craft. And maybe he even didn't know what it was, but he's just smuggling out that intel? Something like that? Corey, right. Yes. Lots of bits and pieces. Back then, especially, there was no computer terminal they could go to and download things to a thumb drive and then go back to their superiors. They had to be very careful. But they were just getting little bits and pieces. And they would have like a diagram. The diagram they would bring back, they would give to the people. And if they didn't have anything to add verbally about what the diagram was about, they would have to reverse engineer just a diagram. David, are there extraterrestrials, to your knowledge, that would use some type of hieroglyphic language? Corey, yes. Most of the written languages are a type of glyph or looks like hieroglyphic. And one character or symbol can mean different things depending on the context it's used in. And one character can mean quite a bit. We're pretty limited in using just one character at a time. David, sure. He mentioned that some of the groups that were getting these packages were biomedical. Why do you think that would be? Corey, well, the reptilians handed over genetics to the Germans very early on. I think. David, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Corey, well, when supposedly DNA was discovered like 53 or 56, something like that, well it, actually, was well known in the programs, and scientists were using genetic engineering way before we supposedly discovered it. And they were testing it on soldiers a lot of the time. David, do you think that part of this biomedical packaging could have been in the development of cloning technology? Corey, absolutely, yes. We were giving cloning technology for creating, just like out of Star Wars, creating a force of soldiers that could be used as cannon fodder. That if you were to lose a few thousand of them, it wasn't going to be that big of a deal. David, is this something that basically kind of allows you to print an organism, like you don't have to wait for it to gestate and grow into adulthood over the course of 20 years? Corey, well, they're growing these things also in these temporal fields. David, right. Corey, and they can make it look like a little zygote grows up into a full-grown human in a couple of hours. David, wow. Corey, but the zygote in the field is experiencing 20 years. David, right. Time acceleration. Corey, right. David, another thing that I think some people, maybe like the nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes, UFO researchers like your Richard Dillon types, would maybe stammer on a little bit was when he said that the documents were not stamped classified. Corey, that's common. That's how you disavow information. David, I don't understand. Corey, well, let's say he got in a car wreck on his way to deliver a package, and he was unconscious. And someone happened to go through his car, found this package. It would just be some very interesting and strange information to him. If it was stamped top secret, or any of the other indicators, then it's going to legitimize what is in the package and legitimize it as being an intelligence briefing. So many intelligence briefings are delivered without any type of classification at all. David, were a lot of the documents that you saw in the glass pads not stamped classified? Corey, I rarely saw any stamps like that. David, really? Corey, there would be like date stamps with signatures and different things like that, but I didn't see a whole lot of classified or top secret stamped on them. David, so then why would they stamp any documents classified? Is that where more people are going to be handling them and they're worried about leaks? Corey, yes. You stamp things for management purposes, for people managing the documentation. Oh, I need to handle this with care, because it says handle with care. David, right. All right. So now we're going to have another segment for you. And in this case we're going to get into the dissolving of the official Nazi government as it was at the end of World War II and the interesting historical question of what exactly happened to these people who had access to extraterrestrials, highly advanced technology, and all of this knowledge that could be applied to what later became the secret space program. William Tompkins, by the end of the war, Germany had already removed massive, not underground, and mountain. This word underground shouldn't be used. All over Germany and the occupied countries, Germany was building mass production of a dozen different types of extraterrestrial vehicles that were given to them by the Dracos. Okay? So these are in mass production, not just prototypes kind of things. They've gone into mass production using slave labor with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of in-mountain massive facilities. 80% of that had all been removed from Germany 6 months before the war ended. It had all been taken to Antarctica, and they were continuing the construction down there. They had access to these with their submarines. They built massive truck submarines, enormous submarines, to bring all this stuff down to Antarctica. So the submarine, still submerged, goes through these tunnels. They go back through the tunnels, and they get to a lake where there's all these facilities and the cities and naval bases and towns and thousands of people. And so paperclip, we got the different people, and they certainly helped. They came in and sort of took over all of the aerospace companies and all of the biomedical research companies. Okay? And actually the Apollo vehicle was just one of the studies of the German ICBM bullets to have been used against New York and all the big cities in the United States. They just hadn't gotten that far by the end of the war. The German biomedical research people came over with paperclip, too. And they set up operations in, for instance, Scripps Research, Medical Research, and Eastern Research companies. They went and worked for them. They got jobs working for them, and then they started to come up in that organization. And then they took over the operation and were then very skillfully and diplomatically implementing many of these medical analyses, which are of extraterrestrial civilization people's history, which they have been doing this out in the galaxy for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. They may have only recently come here, but they've been involved here for over 6,000 years. And we're just now looking over this fence, holding on with our fingertips, and looking out there and figuring out what's going on. It's really about where we are. David, he said that there were hundreds of production facilities. And he shied away from the use of the word underground. He said and mountains. He said hundreds of facilities often involving slave labor in which these advanced Draco craft were being manufactured. That's a shocking statement. And I'm curious as to whether you can independently corroborate that from what you heard. Corey, I don't know about hundreds, but there were a large number of these types of cavern-type bases inside mountains in occupied Europe. I had not been told that they were given to the Germans by the Draco. I was told that this was all a German operation, that they had dug out. I mean, these were dug out tunnels that they used slave labor to do. These caverns. They were chiseled out. David, one of the things that I really thought was interesting about this relates back to what war are the Nazis actually fighting? Because none of these ships actually appeared in World War II to any significant degree except for maybe the occasional sighting of Foo Fighters that American pilots were seeing in World War II. So why do you think the Germans in the middle of World War II are so busily developing a technology that was not being implemented by them in World War II? Corey, the Draco wanted them to build these vessels to fly alongside the Draco and do battle. David, but where? Corey, out in space. David, okay. Corey, they're turning over this technology, to the Germans at the time, for a purpose. And they have to operate within those guidelines. David, they. Who has to operate within the guidelines? Corey, the Germans. When they receive this technology, they now have to operate within certain guidelines dictated by the reptilians. And the reptilians, they manipulate a lot of the surface stuff going on, wars, and that kind of a thing. It's more of a management, planetary management, thing for them. They're more concerned about conquest outside of our planetary sphere. And they are known for having conquered races fight alongside them. I've mentioned the tall Nordic-looking group that has the large forehead, 6 fingers, that are often seen in our solar system working alongside the Draco. And it's been postulated that they are like what the Dark Fleet is to our planet, a group that either was conquered or made a deal with the reptilians and then started fighting alongside them. David, I can't help but be intrigued by this quote based on a class that I had in college that had a deceptively simple name, Contemporary Social Issues, but it was a class in government conspiracy. And it explained, my professors explained to me in that class, Hitler's tanks were made by Ford Motor Company. Hitler's jets were actually made by Boeing. And when the plants were bombed in Germany, they were repaid by these allegedly American corporations, who were allegedly fighting the Nazis, to rebuild those plants. So it almost sounds to me as if the American industrial side was covertly building the war material for both sides of World War II, but then the Germans are involved. What they're really concentrating on is this other stuff that's for a war that's not even about World War II at all. Corey, correct. Right. It was a much more cosmic operation than the world war that was occurring on the planet. David, so were the Draco concerned about whether the Nazis won or lost World War II? Corey, these beings, they play the long game. The war may have served a purpose for them. Whether it was won or lost, we're thinking from a human perspective. They play the long game. Each of these things they use to set up the next thing. So it sounds to me like they were trying to get the Germans. The World War II situation. Put the Germans in a spot to where they needed the help from the Draco. They were starting to lose. They knew from the beginning that once the Americans got in, that it wasn't going to go well. So the Germans, they had an agenda, but the Draco or the reptilians had a much larger agenda that this was just one tiny little piece of. David, so when he starts to describe the dissolution of Nazi Germany under Paperclip, which, of course, is Project Paperclip, the transfer of German scientists, what happens with this biomedical stuff he's talking about? He's talking about them going out there, but then he clearly said what appears to be almost like the origin of the whole pharmaceutical corporate industry is being run, secretly, by these transferred Nazis. And so I'm curious as to what might be the agenda for Germans from World War II building a pharmaceutical corporation, which, according to what Tompkins said, is now the origin of Big Pharma in general. Why would the Fourth Reich be controlling Big Pharma? What's the purpose? Corey, when you have control of pharmacology, I guess, you can. I mean, people are so trusting of a pill. Who knows what exactly that pill is actually doing to us? Is it helping suppress our consciousness? I don't understand why they are doing it. I don't know the specifics. I think it's a multiple agenda type program. David, so do you think that part of the suppressed science might be that there are natural remedies for certain things that the pharmaceutical industry poses as if they are the only answer for, such as depression, things like this? Corey, absolutely. The planet provides us everything we need for medical, psychological, trauma healing. It's all in the jungles that we are burning down. And that might be one of the main reasons we're burning them down. David, alright. Well, that's all the time we have for in this fascinating episode. I sincerely hope that we get to the point in which this is a forensic document that is absolutely essential in the process of full disclosure. And I thank you for being here on the vanguard of that social and cultural awakening with us here on Gaia. I'm David Wilcock with Corey Good and William Tompkins. This is Cosmic Disclosure, and we thank you for watching.